Hello, welcome. I'm Benoit Flippen. I'm the CISO for Scout 24. And we have a lovely panel here to talk about identity problems in fintechs. And I think that will also be relevant outside the fintech space because identity is a pretty big topic. And I do actually want to have each of the panelists quickly introduce themselves, so about a minute each. Why don't we start all the way on the right? Guido?
Hey, my name is Guido Reismüller. I'm doing security at Solaris Bank. So Solaris Bank is like the European biggest banking as a service platform. And we enable other companies, fintechs, to embed financial services into their own products. And I'm doing security there for 6 years, building a team, establishing a security management there. Yeah, pretty tough ride at that fast-growing company.
Hello, I'm Alessandro. I work at Nuri here in Berlin. Nuri is as head of security and infrastructure. So we basically provide, we're one of the companies that Solaris Bank actually enables. So it's our backend for the banking side, and we provide the possibility for customers to have a bank account integrated with crypto products. So we're more like on the investment type rather than exchange. And I'm mostly involved also, let's say my team spans across information security plus product security and many other areas.
So hi, I'm Sheetal. I'm the CISO of Finoa. Finoa is a crypto custodian company. I have around 20 years of experience in information security, and I really look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Hello, so my name is Travis Carlock. I am the CISO for N26 Bank, group. And so, yeah, I've been in the technical side for most of my career and then recently moved over to the dark side of management probably about 3 years ago. And enjoying it.
Yeah, so why don't we jump right in? The interesting thing for me about the whole topic of authentication and authorization is that, to me, this is the most central topic in security. Like, who has access to what? We, as security professionals, need to ensure, only the right people can access the right resources. We have to understand who is who. But this is something that, in my experience, is almost never actually managed or done by the security team themselves. And pretty much every place I've worked, there's been a difference of how much involvement, how much oversight there is between security and operations, either on the product or the internal side. So I guess my first question to the panelists is, in your companies, how much role does the security team have in either defining or operationalizing or oversight or whatever of the authentication infrastructure in your companies? So who wants to jump in first?
All right, I'll go. So there's two types, right? There's internal authentication, so for your employees and and there's for your customers. So for our customer point of view, that is product and engineering teams that work on that. They're our auth team. However, our product security teams, probably like most of you, are embedded in all of our engineering teams. Cross-functional type of teams. So everything has to go through kind of a security review for release. And then also, in addition to that, we also have another layer of a team called our trust and safety team that actually looks at kind of the process flow and the verification mechanisms and any kind of gaps there. So we do a lot of threat modeling. So, for example, I don't know if, it may be for the fintech, but I think it happens for everyone. People are watching your flows all the time. And so whenever you change, say a customer loses their phone. So in fintech, like we pair customers' phones after the know your customer process. Sorry, this might be too many banking terms. But yeah, and so so we develop a trust relationship with your phone almost as a second factor. And so if you lose your phone, that's a big deal. And so we have this trust and safety team that goes through, also does this process view of how could our flows be leveraged for account takeovers and things like that. And then on the internal side, that is actually in our security team, or at least in our security group. So we have an information security group. There's about 6 teams under there, and IAM, Identity and Access Management team, is squarely in that org. Now we do have a tech ops division, and they kind of handle day to day, but the people that set up the actual engineering and the structures are part of the security group.
So, okay. So, well, at Finoa, so it's, of course, when you think about introduction of topics like, insecurity as such in a company, you also have to think about the size of the company, right? So I come from a company that is at the moment smaller than N26, but I would say also much more riskier, because of the kind of business that we are in. So when we have when I'm trying to roll this out, I see it as and in 3 different levels. So first, at the policy level, where you state exactly what you want and you try to understand in like from the BaFin introduction, requirements, and from the BAIT requirements, which is also the banking requirements coming for IT coming from BaFin. We try to understand exactly what regulatory environment is looking for and try to convert that into a policy that can be accepted. Then, of course, as Travis has very beautifully put it, it's not something that the security team can completely be responsible for. We're accountable for it, but we're not responsible for it. And these responsibilities lie with different teams then. So for instance, if it is internal, of course, it's somewhere within TechOps who are really handling those tools that can manage that kind of internal single sign-on and ensure that there is identity and access management for our employees. Then, of course, the parts that's relating to the product, how we authenticate our customers, there again, it is the product team. As he rightly said, you have to threat model. You have to be very careful. I'm coming from a banking environment, so we are very, very careful and we do our due diligence very well. So right from the start of the product, when you think about what kind of structures you would need, you would have to also keep identity and access management in mind and the threats that can come out of it at various levels, and make sure that you are addressing this. Making sure that you're addressing it is the responsibility then is in my company, which is not as big as Telefonica, as N26. We have the security engineering team, which will then ensure that these requirements that we have brought out in the threat modeling is basically vetted and checked and implemented. So that's how we have implemented it, and I pass on to you, Guido.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, can you quickly tell people what the BaFin is?
Okay.
Our nemesis?
Who's good in German here? Okay, it's a tongue twister. I would like to hand over to a German here, Guido. Yes.
Yeah, so it's a Bundesaufsicht für Finanzen. So it's a German governance organization that oversees the banks in Germany, gives the banking licenses, and also Solaris Bank has a full German banking license. So we also need to stick to their rules, which is defined in the so-called the most important standard is called MR risk, and there's the BIT, which is more concrete on an IT level, and also there's a lot of security requirements there. So they define that you have to have a security management system. So we as a large bank set up ISO 27001 as a standard, and they define that you have to have information security risk management and so on. So when we come to access management, so at banks you need to also divide between first and second line. So there is also a third line, which is like the auditors. And secure. So as a large bank, the information security team, we are in the second line. So we are more like the ones defining the requirements for the access management. So this means we define the process. So how should access be granted to applications, to employees? What are like the default permissions when developers start, for example? How do they get higher permissions? How is this documented? How is the process? And the implementation is then on the first level, so which is first line, which is usually the tech departments or the asset owners, or the owners of the applications. And we just need to check over and over again. So twice a year, this is what the regulation requires. We have to review accesses, so the most critical more often. So like admin accesses, we have to review like twice a year. And this is very challenging also because if you have like, Solaris Bank is very fast growing, so we have a lot of assets, we have a lot of third-party providers, cloud services, etc., etc. So it's a challenge to keep this all together. And sometimes if you have a architecture implemented at a certain stage when you grow, you need to throw this over and maybe introduce something more professional, more automated. And I think that's a big challenge.
Yeah, I would say that more or less we also do a combination of what has been discussed, right? So like our approach here, or at least my approach is to, on one side, there is of course the regulation part where you have, okay, look, there are certain things that you need to do. In my opinion, identity management in general, also for customer, but especially internal to the company, you need the governance. So you need basically to establish all the policies, a framework, all the requirements and so on. But then it also gets to the actual implementation, both on the customer side and on the internal side. On the customer side, of course, what you already mentioned, threat modeling, like design thinking, trying to look into how is the authentication actually working despite of the requirements. Are there any way to actually bypass the authentication? So we do this, of course, with internal reviews, with security engineer. We also do external vulnerability assessment or penetration tests of our platform on a regular basis to try to cover as much as we can the potential attack surface. Yeah, and I would say that's it.
Great, thank you. I think the next question I have is around, all of the hype around next-gen authentication. For the last couple decades, everyone in security has been bemoaning the failures of the whole username password thing, but we haven't really come up with a better way yet that is workable. But I think now we're starting to get, especially with a lot of the different providers out there, this whole, modern authentication, passwordless, whatever adaptive MFA type ideas. My question is, how much of that do you use? Do you see it used with your customer base? And does it make them both more secure and easier to access the platforms or not?
Yeah, I mean, I can only talk about how we do kind of authentication. I'm not sure if it's next gen or not. There's always a next gen, by the way. I'm old enough that there's been a next gen since I was 10. I'm old. Anyway, so what we try and do is we use a lot of signing for what we do. And so again, it's important because we use this, we're a mobile first bank, and so we use the properties of the mobile device, so the secure enclave and things like this. And so for us, what we try and do is sign everything, and especially anything important, and then do these challenges for the signature. So for example, if you come into customer support, well, that's a signed request into customer support. So now we know who you are, and it's been verified because you're coming from your phone that's already been through the KYC process. And so that's your second factor already there because you logged into your phone. And you logged into our app, so that's your old username, password, and then we know who you are automatically on that methodology. Also, I'm about to say another banking term. How many know about PSD2? All right, yeah, okay. So we do the same sort of thing to challenge PSD2. So PSD2 is this open banking thing, right, where you're supposed to allow everyone to come into and use your accounts. Basically, you got to open up your API to the world. But we rely on the merchant or the other person to do the strong customer authentication. So we don't always trust that because we don't know that they're doing strong customer authentication, and we might get to this later. Yeah, and so there we can also, if we think it's suspicious, if we think something's weird, we'll just send a challenge, right? So maybe you verified with somebody else, we'll still go ahead and send a challenge if it seems like a risky behavior, and then you have to answer with your phone, your paired device, your second factor, everything like that. So that's some of the ways that we're using kind of this sort of new technology and leverage it to make it faster and better.
That's impressive. Yeah, well, I would say I completely agree with all of you there. So there are, of course, a lot of next gen. We've been talking about passwordless for a while, right? And we've been trying to implement it, but we also see a lot of constraints with going ahead with technologies like that. So most of the time when it comes to real, to rolling out in real life, we are very traditional. So of course, we don't trust the password. That's not like the thing anymore. We have two-factor authentication, and I think what we do at the moment traditionally is to bind it to the phone. Yeah? And as Travis has rightly said, you can have a lot of nuances you get from the phone that you can collect and identify, say, for instance, if the app has been tampered with. And that's basically how we can also detect it. So that's my 2 cents here.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I mean, in the context of passwordless, if you look at the strong customer authentication, password right now is considered the knowledge element. I mean, there might be other knowledge element, of course, but basically when you do, in our case, like the mobile authentication for Fintech, of course, you first ask for a password, then you are basically, at that point, you pair a device where you get, for example, the let's say in that case, you have a signature from the device, and from that moment on, you can start interacting with the customer that way. Of course, there is a third level, which might be the biometry and the link to the transaction, where when a customer is doing the transaction, you want to provide the context, basically has to authorize based on, there has to be the information about what is transferring or not. So, yeah, in terms of next generation, in my opinion, one of the issues with most fintech, of course, like the main problem is most of us don't have offices. Yeah? So, like for example, when PSD2 started, I forgot to activate PSD2 on my Sparkasse account, and it was an account I was not using so much. After 7 months, I said, okay, now I want to log in at the online banking. I had to go in a Sparkasse office, and then they verified my ID, my password. By the way, the photo was 10 years old, so who knows if they actually verified it. And then I finally got access. I went back with the 10 pins or something like that. Next time this happens again, I will lose it again. So in any case, the problem right now with mobile banking is, in my opinion, that on the authentication side, there is too much linking to SMS, to MTAN, which is something that, in my opinion, in the long term, has to disappear. So where basically, like even when you use device binding or you're pinning the device to use a signature, you still have the main flow that starts with an SMS. So in some cases where you could, like if you find a way to get to the SMS, maybe compromising the customer phone, you can initiate the entire flow, pair a new device in certain circumstances, and that's something that, of course, needs to be addressed in long term, in my opinion.
Yeah, for Solaris Bank, it's a bit different because we are like B2B2C company, so we are not offering any banking applications directly, but APIs. So, for example, Nuri backend connects to our backend API. So there we do classic authentication via OAuth 2, and combine it also with second factor like whitelisting of IPs. So we are also, and when it comes to end customer authentication, also the API, we offer this device binding, and we ensure that, because PS2 also applies to us, so we have to ensure that all our partners follow this second factor authentication. We also always ensure that one of the factors is always to Solaris Bank, so that it's device binding to us or SMS to us. And that's also very special about our business model because we have the banking license, but Nuri doesn't. So we have to somehow check if Nuri does a good job. So we require them to do pen tests, or we even use spot checks for some of the companies that we audit them. So this is a bit special about our business model.
Nice. And I think that actually comes right into what Travis was hinting at before, this whole topic of kind of federated identity, which PSD2 is a part. But do you and Solaris also see yourself kind of driving a wider federated identity between partners and kind of like pushing the whole fintech scene forward in that realm?
It's more, a difficult question. I mean, PSD2 the regulation is quite clear. We have to fulfill it. There are some, visions of having like digital identity at some point in the blockchain, and there's also initiatives driven by our government. So even I think Angela Merkel was driving this a couple of years ago already. But until there's like a standard that is really commonly acceptable and regulated, I think it will take more time. And at the moment, we can only do what we have to do or what we need to comply to. So that's all.
I have something to
okay. So let's say talking not in terms of regulation, but what would be like in general, like the evolution of it. I think there are multiple problems that need to be addressed. So, for example, there are like projects like ADAS for a digital identity. You have a question there. Do you actually want everybody that has your to authenticate you and to know via API who you are after you verified your identity? And I'm personally more for a distributed approach where I authenticate myself to the bank, but for the specific use case, but not that there is like a distributed database where my identity is being thrown around the world. Yeah. And it is but for sure, like there are some systems that are actually using ADAS, but banks are not really implementing or adopting them right now. Like, for example, there are very few banks that allow to the AID or ADAS in Germany. Also, like in Italy, there is it's called SPID in Italian. Let's say it's a system using SAML for authentication. Most Italians are actually using that, but some banks are starting now to do that. In France as well, there is a similar system. It might be an alternative, still with certain concerns, but more like in the direction of making sure that people can just iterate fast and reduce the interaction or having to talk in a video conference with somebody or in a video call. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, for me, federated auth has good and pluses and minuses like everything. The pluses are because PSD2 means we have to trust kind of anybody's authentication, and I don't trust any. I'm in security. I don't trust anyone. And so to have some sort of central authority that is highly regulated, highly audited, and that sort of stuff, but for me, it almost need to be, and careful, I know what I'm saying, that this special word here, a government authority, because if you did it within fintechs or if you did it within banks, I mean, being that master authenticator gives you access to all the datas, right? Of every customer, of every bank, of all the if you wanted to, it depends on the scope, obviously. But then that makes that central person be very powerful. So if that's a Deutsche Bank kind of thing, then that would be very, very unfair, kind of like to the rest of the ecosystem, kind of. So, so the distributed model means you have to trust a lot of people that you hope they do a good job. And then like we did, you have to put in special controls to make sure that, even if they didn't do a good job, the customer is somewhat protected because it's still your responsibility. Their money's with your bank. And then the centralized model might have better security, but then that's a whole lot of power to put in one place. And then you also have the password database kind of issue where you crack that place and, good luck to everybody in the country. So yeah, there's some pluses and minuses basically.
And I think that is also very, very risky and very dangerous for a larger number of people, especially if it's coming from banking. And identity and access management, even like when we think about tools, I think this panel would really, talking today about the attacks that happen in identity and access management, if you talk about what happened to Okta, we can see the kind of impact, right? It just rolls out to so many different companies. And so even when we forget about federated identity, but even when we are like looking at an identity provider we can use in our environment, there are so many factors you need to think about till probably their end of supply chain. So, yeah.
I'd say maybe one more question for the panel from me, and then we'll open it up to all of y'all. Maybe let's go a little bit more down into the technical side. How do you deal with kind of the scale of API authentication? And in particular, the problem that I'm thinking about is managing tokens and sessions such that you don't overwhelm your auth server with every single call to your bank requiring a separate auth, but then also making sure that you can immediately deprovision a token if someone logs out or if you recognize something as compromised or anything. So how do you do that balance of session management?
For us, well, we offer, as previously explained, our APIs to other companies, and we have that second factor. So we whitelist IPs. So we can have a bit of longer sessions, but still we have a session timeout that requires frequent renewal. It's also documented in our API documentation. So whenever a new partner, so we call our customers partners, whenever a new partner like Nuri will onboard and want to connect to Solaris Bank, they have to read our API specification and they can implement against it. So then, let's say we have a session timeout of 10 minutes and they need to send a renewal like every 10 minutes. And this is just like specified, and so for us it's pretty easy because we set these requirements and then these requirements can be implemented by our partners. I think the challenge is more on the end user side because they usually have smaller. You want a small session timeouts, and there has to be a balance between convenience and security. Maybe Alexander.
I mean, in terms of scaling, it depends. I mean, on the customer side, of course, we're using, let's say, backend that are a little bit faster. For example, Redis for storing sessions. So that allows us to keep as much as we can in memory, especially in case of where we have spikes in traffic, like in case of a crypto company, you have a change in a volatility of certain currency, and suddenly you get like the 10,000 people more logging in 1 minute just to check the price. So, of course, you need to scale there. We don't have very much a distribution model like our problem right now, at least on the customer side. Internally, like synchronizing the session or expiration of session between application, I'm also for the distributed approach there, where you basically have, okay, let's say the company, you have a central, let's say, authority that this, let's say, or federated entity that gives the access to a certain application, and then the application managed to use a session locally so that you actually don't have to overload the centralized system. On an API level, it depends. I'm also trying to use the distributed approach. So that means that we have, let's say, hundreds of microservices distributed in multiple, let's say, platform or cluster of services, and each one has its own session storage when it has to talk, for example, to a Solaris Bank backend or to another partner backend, and so on.
Well, I think you brought to light a very good point. So session management can, I've had these arguments with the product team a lot because we're coming from where, well, of course, as part of security, you need to ensure you have very good session management in place. You're following a certain practice, and then from a product point of view, you're actually just annoying the life out of the end customer. So yes, we need to. Then I would say, when you need to speak with the product owner to really understand what is your end customer, what is the activity that they're doing, and what is the risk that we face out of this. And, when we do the threat modeling, then we kind of consider a little bit more the architectural differences, and I would suggest doing it tailor-made. So depending on the situation, you can create, you can set up your own periods of session management. That's just what I would say.
Yeah, so kind of like I was talking about earlier, we kind of work with signatures a lot. And so, obviously we use the OAuth flow. So you have the long-lived and the short-lived token. We found that very few people actually in their mobile device click to the settings and click log off, right? And so they're actually kind of always there. And so if it's a new device, if there's certain indicators of IP coming from weird IPs, then you can obviously take preventative measures. But generally, if you're doing device signing, that's much faster, less computationally intensive than asymmetric, right? You don't need so many calls back and forth, that sort of stuff. And you still have that kind of security as long as you trust the device. We can go into a discussion if you want to trust the device that much, but so far our account takeover numbers are super low, so I think we're working. But yeah, because at least we're cloud-based, the computational resources I haven't gotten to that argument yet, just quite yet. We'll basically just throw some horsepower at it if we needed to.
Now, I guess we will open it up to questions from the crowd. Oh.
Thanks, guys. I have a question, serious one. So over the last 3 years of hacking fintech, I've noticed that you guys have more responsibilities and less options of how you can affect the process. Yeah, so what's happening is over the last few years, I see how Google points out to Visa saying, hey, this is their fault. This is how we implemented things. You guys from N26 pointed out on some vulnerabilities in Apple Touch ID because you massively rely on that in your sign-in features. Obviously, Alessandro is fully dependent on the guys from Solaris Bank. And when I came to Alessandro, he said, hey, guys, this is not, we can do anything with that, and just pointed out to the guys from Solaris Bank. And that's what I see over the last 3 years. So my question is, do you guys on that side of the fence feel the same, like you stuck between entities that require something from you, but from another side, you don't have enough power to affect the process? Or it's just in my head?
I have a personal interpretation of this. I'm not German, I'm Italian, but I've been in Germany 10 years. And my idea, one thing that I noticed when I moved to Germany was that the German government in general tends to have very strict rules, and they tend to renew these rules very often. And I think that's what happened, for example, with MRISC, with BIT, but also in general at the European level with the PSD2. So what they said, okay, look, there are so many banks that are doing this wrong. Let's just do BIT. It's basically IT requirements for banks. Yeah. And if you look at the norm, 3 years ago, in my opinion, it was innovative because they say, okay, well, something you know, something you own, plus the biometric, where many companies in the private sector were not doing this. So the problem is that then fast forward a few years, things start to become obsolete. Yeah. And, but in general, of course, where something was innovative 3 years ago, with over time, it's not the case anymore. And, the same people who met 3 years ago, basically, they're probably not there anymore, or, it's very difficult to basically come up with, very fast with, improvements. And of course, there are also companies like Solaris Bank or, everybody, we do certain investment into implementing these things. So you actually need to be agile and to iterate fast, but the norm actually doesn't change so often as you like to have. And we have very, very strict, in my opinion, margin to improve things because if we try to do something that is too innovative, we will get under the regulator audit high.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because you said people are pointing at each other. So I think as fintechs are growing usually very fast, and they have to be fast on the market. So not everybody's implementing stuff by themselves. So we rely on other third-party services. We embed other frameworks that are already out there. There's a lot of open source that is used. And I think the challenge is to really not fully trust those things, but really do a proper assessment. And I mean, Sheetal mentioned Okta. I mean, many companies rely on it. And now we saw they didn't really do well in this situation. So people might rethink, do they really want to full rely on Okta, or maybe use somebody else for the second factor, or, you know, not put full trust on one element or one third party. And yeah, I think that many of us, to build a product fast to the market, you rely on open source, and you rely on providers that offer certain security features.
So I would say yes. We have constraints all over the place constantly. But a lot of it comes from, like probably most of you that work for some sort of web company, comes from the product side, you know? I mean, customers want a lot of these features. They want to make sure that we work with, you know, Apple Pay and all the various other features out there. And then we have the government regulations, which is of course the PSD2 sort of stuff. And then we have, what he's talking about, BIT, which for me, BIT is a 27-page document that says nothing except for, hey, do stuff securely and we'll interpret it if you did it when we come to your door. So, you know, yeah, auditing is quite interesting here, in this phase. But yeah, there's constraints constantly. And we're also in a growth market. I mean, and so there's a lot of competition going on. So that's why for me, we always try to do risk-based approaches. Example, this PSD2 thing, you know, there's a regulation around, like, if they make a transaction 50 euro or less, then we take one action. If it's 100 euro or more, it's more. If we have that user as a risky credit score, maybe, then we'll take a different action. And so for us, there's a lot of internal logic on how you can address the action at the point of time of that action. So that's kind of, yeah, that's the way we look, because we want to, our end goal is always to protect the customer, because they're the ones that are angry with you. They're the one they're going to go to BaFin and complain. And then that can cause you all sorts of trouble. So yeah, there's constraints constantly. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
I'll try and also answer it from my perspective. What I can tell you is fintech is heavily regulated, and we really want to do our best to ensure that we are meeting up with all of the security requirements, because we know how risky it is for the end customer, right? So, yes, whatever is under our control, you know, in terms of processes, in terms of rolling out products, as you said, you know, we try to make sure right from the scratch, right from ideation, in fact, that we put security requirements into the product and embed it in. And those areas, I would say, of course, we have control, and we make sure that that security is taken seriously when we work in fintech. But out of our control is things like partners and, you know, third-party integrations that we have to use as part of trying to meet up with all the requirements of making the business profitable as well. And that's where I think BaFin helps us, because we have to do because we have to, as part of complying with BaFin, really ensure we do a thorough job with evaluating each third party before we onboard it. So, for instance, even Okta. Yeah, so when you're onboarding a customer like Okta, you have to really ensure that before you have them on board, you have considered all the risk elements and you have an assurance around each of it. So yes, it is difficult for us, but well, we're trying our best.
So an entirely different question, or I'm asking for a clarification here. Some of you mentioned EID and the ID card in Germany, and I still wonder why after 12 years we are not seeing this being used more in any area for identifying people, because it has been done for that. There's hardly any security risks, and I think someone mentioned that you don't trust it because then you would have a single entity, and which would be the German state. Maybe you can explain this further, why you're not trusting it, or why you're not using that.
Well, so we do have teams that are kind of like looking at different ways we can do. We would use that in our KYC process, right? Because like once you want to know the customer, you have to use methodologies to identify who they are. So while we are looking at that, but at N26 we try to look at solutions. That's the other thing that's kind of weird is because we work in so many markets, not just Germany, but France and Italy and Spain and blah, that they all have their own regulations. And so we were thinking about that, but we were thinking about maybe using, say, your passport chip, and maybe be able to scan your passport chip or something that's more kind of ubiquitous across the EU. But yeah, I mean that's really not a bad idea, to be honest with you. To kind of look at that as well. We do use third-party KYC providers, so we are kind of limited sometimes with what they can also intake. Yeah, so that would be my answer there. But we are trying to look ahead because I'm certainly KYC is a heavily looked at portion from the BaFin, you would say, right? Yeah, and AML and that sort of stuff. So yeah, we're trying. We're getting there.
Yeah, so that was mostly a personal observation, so I don't get that in the way. So for me, like the argument AIDAS or a digital identity is for sure, it can help customers verify faster. Yeah. One of the problem in Germany, for example, I don't remember the exact data, but I think until a few years ago, it was not mandatory to have the chip enabled. And actually, I think 40% of the German people were required and would request an ID card. They actually requested the chip to be disabled. And now it's enabled by default, but you still have to, and the user has actually to onboard itself. So basically, like if you look at the company that wants to invest in the integration of that, and you look just at what is the conversion rate that you can get, okay, how many customers in Berlin can actually onboard with that tool after like we spent 3 months of implementation, and then you look at the real number, you see, oh shit. And another problem is here, for example, if you look at the Italian system that is based on a SAML protocol and federation, that's actually compatible with the AIDA specification, but still for a company like N26, us or whatever, you need to integrate with the Italian system, with the French system, with the German system, and you also, so it is possible, but like the way this works is not really standardized overall across Europe. So it's just difficult to implement. And again, KYC is one of the most controlled areas from BaFin, I would say. So your margin there is very, very small. Yeah. So, yeah.
I have worked in the past for a digital identity company called VeryMe. Yes. So I think I agree with you, Alessandro. It's actually not so easy to get the trust of people to really use this digital identity with the government backing it, because sometimes they have fears about their privacy. Sometimes they have fears about what about the central organization, what if it gets hacked? And so yeah, it will take a long time, if at all the government tries to roll it out in a much more organized way and makes it stricter to use those kind of identification methods. Maybe it might work in the future, but as of now, yeah, it will take a huge implementation from our side to really embed those into our systems when we see that it's not really that accepted.
Any other questions?
So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the history of the federated identity and the objections that like the pre-existing silos had to it, because I'm seeing a kind of similarity potentially between that and where we are with messengers with the DMA space at the moment. Like, you know, they're siloed and they want to stay that way, but government is pushing for federation. So is there a similarity there, or am I imagining it?
Because no one else will answer. Kind of, could you restate your question a little bit? Like I said, when I was talking about the federated auth, it puts a gatekeeper in there, right? And so who will be that gatekeeper is kind of my question to that.
So I was thinking back about like who objected to open banking, like who didn't want open banking to happen in the past.
Oh, okay. I can't speak to the regulatory and ongoings of PSD2. I just comply. So yeah.
So how do you deal with the threat of a malicious insider, for example? Like, are there like anomaly detections for like accessing a huge amount of clients, like Octobridge? So what's your take on this?
That's a huge topic, right? I mean, insider threat at a bank is a real deal. Yeah, so it depends on exactly what system you're talking about. And this is part of where I rely on like product security people over there in 26. Yeah, so everything needs to be threat modeled for its particular instance. So we have a customer support platform that we built in-house. So yeah, metrics on that, VIP list, block list, too many accesses within 1 hour. You know, there's just different reporting features, both technical and operational, that we would use. But that's just for that. You know, again, someone talked here about how IAM is very strictly controlled. So yeah, I've worked, you know, again, I'm old, so I haven't been in 26 my whole life. And the user onboarding and offboarding and user recertification, not just for privileged users, but every third party, every application, every database needs to go through user recertification for us every 6 months. And so that's how you start to get that idea. Zeem or SIM is basically one of the new, not new, but in the last 2 or 3 years, it's a big buzzword in BaFin and BIT. And for them, in my old days, Zeem used to be something that like took security metrics a little bit and kind of would plug it out. Now it's the magic answer box. And so it needs to be plugged into everything. You go to every business process owner who has supporting assets and you say, what could go wrong with your supporting assets? Let me collect all the logs from your supporting assets, IT assets, and then let me go and put in a bunch of user alerts for that. And you just go through every process in your bank, and do that sort of, anomaly detection. And so, yeah, insider threat is a huge, huge issue. Yeah. And it's a culture thing too. Because, last thing, I'll give it to you. It's a culture thing too, because we have a lot of techies, and I used to work at SoundCloud, right? And so insider threat at SoundCloud was like, hey man, what? We all trust each other. No big deal. And so you have a lot of engineers and you have a lot of people that come from that sort of mindset. And then you come into the bank. And so now you have to kind of help work with everyone to say, look, this is serious. We have entire criminal organizations that try to get people on the inside all the time. And it's not that we don't trust you. It's not that we don't want to group hug and everything, but we have customers to protect. And one of my culture things is I also let everyone know 50% of our employees have N26 bank accounts. So you're not just protecting some ephemeral customer or some market share or whatever like that. You're actually protecting your colleagues. And so this is kind of how we address insider threat.
Sorry, okay. Well, I mean, for me, we would have to discuss 2 hours just about that, but it's more like the approach is you need a security program, yeah, and you need to have a layered security approach. So security multiple layers. So for example, for internal application, you need to have user reconciliation, you need to have least privilege, 4S principle, segregation of duty, audit trail into every internal tool. You need to monitor this audit trail. You need to have alerts on a certain event. It means you have to sit down. You need to say what is irrelevant to you, because otherwise you will have a dashboard exploding with alerts. Then for access to production infrastructure, for example, you want to have things like short-lived tokens, where you also need a 4S principle. So there has to be an incident declared or a maintenance declared somewhere in a dedicated system, a second person that approves before the token is actually issued. You want to have a good SDLC in place where you actually deploy a production system via pipelines, where under normal circumstances, nobody logs into any production system, and you generate a man-to-middle alerts when that happens. Code reviews with 2 reviewers, where nobody can merge until certain rules are happening, static code analysis, dynamic code and application security testing. So it's a collection of everything. And unfortunately, you're still not secure. You just raise the bar.
So insider threat is a very good topic, and it's really scary for fintech because yes, we have, and especially for what the business that I am in crypto, right? We have a huge risk that of course people know that people with inside knowledge or with they publicize themselves on LinkedIn, and each person's position and who could have more information than the other. So insider threat is like a very big deal for us. And I see a couple of ways in which you can handle insider threat. Number one, of course, the easiest way is the contracts. So you have very heavy requirements on the contracts depending on which role they're taking. Is it customer support? Is it the sysadmin role, or whatever role that you're taking in? What kind of detail should be put into the contract based on the risk that role gives? Second thing is you need to have a very thorough knowledge of your system. As Travis just said, you have to understand how your processes work and how what system connects to what, who's working on what. You need to know how to intelligently separate your systems. So for that, I always begin with a threat modeling. Yeah? So the threat modeling will give you a very clear picture of all the possible threats that you would have, even from an insider point of view or from a service point of view. And you have to take threat modeling output very seriously. It is a very detailed process. It's tiresome. I guess the security team gets exhausted doing it, but as an output of it, you kind of understand who even internally could be a threat to this environment that we're talking about. The third thing I would suggest is having internal bug bounty program. So what the benefits of the internal bug bounty program is that you kind of incentivize it, you gamify it, you say that, we, of course, as part of being in this business, want to make it very secure. The security team is a layer above the real tech team. So is it possible for you guys to take that security role seriously and identify, if not in your project, don't embed it into your project, but in any area that you find, if there is a low-hanging fruit for, say, an insider or from outside that we have not already considered as part of our security process, please inform us, and we will provide you a bounty. And the bounty is usually, of course, I would suggest not putting in like cash bounties onto it, but more like a team event. So you celebrate that we have hardened our own environment, and the hero from our team has basically found this aspect, and you celebrate it internally. So internal bug bounty has brought to light a lot of issues that we wouldn't have been able to find with even penetration testing. So that's also one area which I would suggest companies to use. Yeah. and there are of course a lot more around audit that I could keep speaking about, but I would please hand over to Guido.
Thanks. Don't know if I have a lot more to add. People are, I think, starving, want to go for lunch. So I think everything has been said. So I also think you need to really understand your business processes, and that's where I would start before you even do the threat modeling, because you need to know what's going on in your business, what information is processed, and what assets you use. And then you need to, on a risk-based level, apply different security layers. And you should always do multiple layers, because one day can always fail. You need to have 2FA. You need to have monitoring. So, for example, we on our production environment, we see every activity that is done by somebody who has access to production, and we have to, sign it off. This is just one measure, and then also, of course, awareness, culture, and yeah.
Great. I guess if you have any more questions, feel free to hit up all of the panelists during lunch, and have a great rest of the day.